Some breaking news coming in. Senior Kremlin officials have, in fact, told Russian state television that Russia-US talks have ended and no date as of now has been set for President Trump and President Putin's meeting. This is what AP, the Associated Press, is reporting at this moment. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State in the United States, has said that US-Russia officials agreed to create a high-level team to negotiate Ukraine peace and promote economic cooperation. This is the latest which is coming in at this moment. My colleague Mohammed Ghazali joins us with more details. Important meeting without the... All right, let's just listen in first to what the Secretary of State of US is saying.
I mean, I don't view diplomacy that way. I think diplomacy ultimately is based on actions. It's based on commitments that are kept. So I think I came away today convinced that they are willing to begin to engage in a serious process to determine how and how quickly and through what mechanism can an end be brought to this war. Whether we can ultimately reach that outcome will obviously depend on every side in this conflict's willingness to agree to certain things. So I think it's important to have this meeting because we haven't really had much engagement with the Russians for almost 3 years. And it sets the table for future conversations. How that turns out will be up to the parties and their willingness not just to make commitments but to live by them. That'll be tested in the weeks to come. But I can tell you again, as I reiterate, President Trump has made it very clear during the campaign he thought this conflict needed to end. He's the only leader in the world that could have started a process that we saw here today, and this process is going to continue. And when you talk about an enduring and sustainable end to the conflict, it means one that's acceptable to everyone involved in it. And that obviously includes Ukraine, but also our partners in Europe, and of course the Russian side as well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there, but I just wanted to also take a moment, I think on behalf of all of us and the President, to thank our partners in Saudi Arabia, to thank our hosts for bringing this together, and particularly the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his team. We are moving quickly, which means they moved very quickly to be such gracious hosts, and we certainly are all appreciative.
Absolutely.
As a last question, will the Saudis take on a more active mediation role as these talks move forward?
Well, that's a decision for the kingdom to make, but I can tell you that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is playing an indispensable role in making today possible. Not just hosting us, but bringing the parties together to have these conversations. I think it's something we're very grateful for. Something we're very grateful for the partnership that we have with them on a host of issues, and this being one of them, where we thank them for doing it, and we hope that they will. I think they've offered, and I believe that they will continue to be helpful in any way they can.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Can I just I'll be extremely brief. I know you're rushing. So what is the next step now? The high-level team you mentioned is number 2 or number 3.
Yeah, so let me walk you through the next step is multi-track. The first next step is working through our respective teams at the diplomatic side just to ensure that our diplomatic missions can function. There's been a series of reciprocal actions taken over the last 10 years that have really diminished our ability to operate in Moscow, as an example, and they would argue their ability to operate in Washington. We're going to need to have vibrant diplomatic missions that are able to function normally in order to be able to continue these conduits. The second is a high-level team, including those who are experts on these topics, the technical side, to begin to engage with their side on parameters of what an end to this conflict would look like. And on that front, obviously, there's going to be engagement and consultation with Ukraine, with our partners in Europe and others. But ultimately, the Russian side will be indispensable to this effort, and so that process will begin. And then the third is, together with those other two, is beginning to engage in identifying the extraordinary opportunities that exist should this conflict come to an acceptable end, the credible opportunities that exist to partner with the Russians geopolitically on issues of common interest, and frankly economically on issues that hopefully will be good for the world and will also improve our relations in the long term between these two important countries. So all three of those efforts will be happening in conjunction with one another. Obviously the diplomatic one is one we hope to move pretty quickly on, because this involves the treatment of our respective missions. The second one will be difficult, which is the question of Ukraine and the end of that conflict. But I think that's essential in order for the third piece to even be possible, which is our ability to work together on other geopolitical matters of common interest and of course, some pretty unique, potentially historic economic partnerships as well. The key that unlocks the door for those opportunities, however, is the end to this conflict.
But Brett, in terms of when does the high-level team meet? Has there been any date?
There's no date set, but as President Trump is, as you've seen over the last 4 weeks, not patient in terms of getting action. He drives hard. He wants to get things done. He's been wanting to do this, and he's moving very quickly to fulfill the promises he made to the American people when they elected him as our president.
Okay, and then in terms of number one, in the restoration of the diplomatic missions, you'll remember that the first big tit of the tit for tats was after the Skripal poisoning, and the U.S. under one of your predecessors, Mr. Tillerson, expelled a lot of Russian diplomats, to which they responded. The consulate in St. Petersburg got closed down by the Russians. You guys closed down the consulate in Seattle, and several others. Are those going to reopen?
Well, that's what we're going to be talking about. And ultimately, again, I'm not going to negotiate or work on that in public. That's what these channels will be about. But ultimately, what the goal we need to have is we have to have some normalcy in our missions and in their ability to function.
And the main embassies even.
And in the main embassies
just the main
in particular.
embassies, regardless of the consulates.
I mean, if our diplomatic channels are broken, it's going to be very difficult to consistently engage on a host of topics, including some unrelated irritants that could derail the broader talks on Ukraine. So there has to be some improvement in the way our missions are able to work and in the environment and space that they're given to operate in. So that's something we want to move on quickly, and it's important to set the table for the other two things that we want to do. But I think the key really in all of this is ultimately going to be whether an agreement can be reached with all parties involved on an acceptable resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. Because if that happens, not only will the world be a better place, but I think there will be some pretty unique opportunities to work with them on areas of bilateral geopolitical interest and some very unique economic opportunities. But we have to get the Ukraine situation resolved first in a way that's acceptable to everyone.
Okay, my last one. But does that mean if you get the staffs back to the normal operational level and staffs at the embassies, that you consider the Skripal case of the Crimea annexation to be closed? There are no longer issues? Because I think, you mentioned that Keir Starmer is going to be in Washington next week. I can imagine that the Brits won't be particularly.
I'm not going to negotiate or talk through every element of the disruptions that exist or have existed in our diplomatic relations and the mechanics of it. Suffice it to say that President Trump has pledged and intends to keep his promise to do everything he can to bring an end to this conflict. We cannot do that unless we have at least some normalcy in the way our diplomatic missions operate in Moscow and in Washington, D.C. And so we need to work to improve that, and we're going to work with them to see what's possible within that context.
Does that include removing Lavrov from rescinding sanctions that have been imposed?
We're just not at that level of conversation yet, but there'll be a number of topics that will have to be discussed along the way. We haven't even begun that process. Today was just an agreement to begin a process to talk about those things.
All right.